Hello and welcome to this MSP Voice webinar series. Today we are joined by Virtus Law. A couple of housekeeping items. If you have questions, please utilize the Q&A box in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll get to the questions either in line or at the end, depending on the type of question it is. This session is being recorded, so recording will be made available on mspvoice.com within 1 week of this webinar. So with that out of the way, again, welcome to this MSP Voice webinar series today with Virtus Law. I am pleased to be joined by Thomas Fafinski, who is going to go through the strategies associated with retaining key employees, like building a layer cake. And I've seen some pictures of the cake. It looks delicious. Tom, take it away.
Thank you. I got to tell you, I wish we've got this picture somewhere, and it's if it was something that I had in front of me, I would have eaten it for sure. It looks pretty good. So my whole idea of getting this key employee engaged actually comes from a client that I had probably 10, 11 years ago. And the client came to me and was presenting with the need to bring on the key salesperson of this technology consulting organization to become an owner of the organization. And they were going to do an outright grant of ownership. And the company was worth $28 million.
Okay.
So an outright grant would result in compensation, W-2 compensation, being reported to this individual salesperson of $2.8 million. The taxes, state and federal, would be roughly 1.4 million.
Yeah.
And so they came to me with this, hey, Tom, we have a problem. We're trying to come up with a way to structure this. We're going to have to front the $1.4 million and give it to him as a loan, and we need some sort of loan repayment program for him. And I said, whoa, hang on a second. Why are we doing this again? So they came to me with this assumption that this is what we're going to do. What I learned in the company, or in the conversation with the two owners of the company, there were two owners, is that the salesperson was responsible for $18 million of sales, roughly.
Okay.
So part of it.
Yeah.
What I learned more is that they did not really care for him very much. Which they're bringing in an owner, a person that, and so I explored that part, Doug. That was kind of interesting. Why do you think they didn't like? What would you think the reasons would be?
I don't know. Sometimes, I know sales and executives sometimes don't get along very well because they just don't. As long as they're doing results, then that's really what matters.
Right, and the sales guys are they're outward, extroverted guys. They have high lifestyle. They have big houses. They go out to bars and parties and restaurants and drop hundreds of dollars on a meal. This guy had a boat and a vacation home and really extravagant travel. He would bring his key clients down to his Arizona property and lots of golf outings and hunting and all, just a lot of spend in this life. And he would spend even if it wasn't the company approved. So if there was a hunting excursion and the company said, no, you've done 3 already. No, I'm doing it anyway. He would just do it and he would shell it out of his pocket. The two owners are guys that they built this company to be 28 million. They were pretty thrifty guys.
Yeah.
They were a little bit sales oriented, but they're very financially responsible. They had huge payrolls to consider and things like that. So they just really didn't have like similar overlapping characteristics or things like that. Now, because he was so successful, the other sales folks that I believe there was 4 other sales folks. And they accounted for the remaining $10 million of sales. And they despise this guy.
Of course.
Why do you think they despised him?
Because he was bringing in all the money. He was getting all the you know, he was making good bank if he was selling that much compared to them.
Right. And when they were out in the field knocking on doors and somebody would say to them, oh, you're with ABC Company. Oh, where's Steve? Bring,
Yeah.
I heard about Steve. Can I talk to Steve? So they were actually competing with this guy internally. So I'm going to call the guy Steve. His name isn't Steve. I'm changing the name to protect the innocent as it all
Yeah.
goes. So
Well,
Steve,
I think, but I think I know Steve. I think I've met him before. So.
Doug, you are Steve. No, I'm kidding. Wouldn't that be nice though? Because with that 18 million in sales, he had over seven figures when you included his bonuses.
Yeah.
But he also had base comp of about $120 or 120,000.
Yeah.
So his base comp was pretty low. His teammates really, they didn't care for him because they were competing with him in the marketplace. They also didn't like that he was kind of arrogant and kind of showed everything to them. He didn't teach them anything. And the
Mhm.
reason why, when I interviewed him, he didn't teach them because they weren't nice to him. So why would he teach them? They're not being nice. So it was this whole, cycle deal that was going on. Guy's making a lot of money and he's threatening to quit because Steve says, I don't like it here. I come here, people don't like me. I like a hassle to get everything approved. My
Mhm.
comp is super low. I don't really get any benefits of ownership, and I'm begging for, to get these events taken care of and all that stuff. I want to be an owner. And so it occurred to me that maybe what we ought to do is go back from the beginning and make sure that we built the right employment relationship with him. And
Yeah.
so rather than do the outright grant, I talked to them about building a layered cake. The very first thing you have to have if you want to keep employees and you want to keep key employees. So as you work your way up the layers of the cake, you can
Mhm.
see that the cake gets smaller. So doesn't that cake look good, Doug?
Yeah, it does. I didn't have dessert with lunch, so I'm getting hungry now.
So as we build up each layer, it gets a little smaller and smaller. That is because, for the cake, if you want it to be a stable cake, in the employment relationship, it's because not everybody is key. There are
Mhm.
some people that are important, but not everybody is key. In your company, you might have one or two key employees that aren't owners. If you had more than two, then it's probably a pretty big company with
Yeah.
multiple divisions. So the very first thing you do for all employees, it's a really broad base. We want to have a good benefits program, or some sort of benefits like, the benefits of being there and being able to use their equipment, being able to look out the window and have a nice view type, that type of benefits, but then also the benefit program.
Yeah.
And what you want to do is you want to be as competitive. You don't have to be the top benefit program provider in your industry or in your geography. You just have to kind of compete and be a little bit more than what half the folks would do. If most people have retirement profit sharing programs or plans, you need to have something like that in place. You need to have health insurance in place in most situations. Do you have to cover the family? Maybe not, or maybe you cover 50% of the family, but you look at your industry and you want to be just slightly above.
Yeah.
Life insurance is a really, really inexpensive thing to provide as a benefit. Disability insurance is really an inexpensive thing. Vacation is a benefit that, especially if sometimes people do PTO versus vacation,
Yeah.
and that's perceived as a benefit. Do you like PTO more than vacation time and sick
Uh,
time?
I don't know. I'm a little on the fence about it. I like vacation time because, that's what it is. PTO, it just seems like, well, if you need a day off, take a day off. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm
So
old school, I guess there.
yeah. So the idea is try to match who you are trying to engage in your company, try to match what their expectations would be. So if that were your expectations, then you would be looking at, well, I kind of want to have a deal where there's holidays, maybe 10 holidays, and 10 days vacation and maybe 3 days of sick leave or something, or 5 days or whatever the number is.
Yeah.
You might be working with others who would rather just see it all lumped in and say you can take it whenever you want. But that kind of base layer is super, super important. And that's for the folks that that staff the front desk to the key employees. The next layer that we add on is this corporate culture. Corporate culture really can't be underemphasized because you get a groundswell of productivity within your organization if you have the right corporate culture. If the culture is exciting and working towards a common objective or goal, maybe a themed annual deal where the company develops. Have you seen that before, where companies will develop a theme for the year?
I have in some companies, not any that I've been involved with.
That's kind of a cool thing. One was one of my clients did, I think it was Carpe Diem, like seize the day or seize the,
Yeah.
and that was kind of their thing that happened throughout the year. Every time they kind of tied it to that theme and got everybody pointed in the right direction. It's good for employee engagement.
Yeah, actually, you know what? Now that I think about it a little bit more, it would actually go back to every year we'd have a sales kickoff, and there was a theme for the sales kickoff, and that would kind of permeate through the rest of the year. So, that kind of idea of, hey, we're going to start the year, we're all going to get on the same page, and here's the theme for the kickoff, and then that theme carries through for the rest of the year. So, yeah, now that I think about it.
I think that's a really important thing to look at doing, having a theme for the year. You got to demonstrate appreciation to your employees on a regular basis in a way that they understand. I will talk about the 5 primary languages that people. Have you heard of the book, The Love Languages, the 5 love languages or something? I think it's like 5 love languages. But it talks about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I said I haven't heard of that one, but sounds interesting.
It talks about the way that people receive love in their life and how they feel love in their life. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But you do want to address that piece. You want to recognize people, but in a way that's not uncomfortable to them. So the salesperson, Steve, in my story, and most of the story on Steve is true. The name again has changed, but he wants that outward recognition in front of everybody. Whereas there might be some employees that would prefer it to be, a written paragraph in an email saying, hey, just FYI, Kathy did the following things, and if you see Kathy, congratulate her. Whereas Steve wants it to be a live event in front of everybody where he gets to stand up and be, applauded type of.
He wants the red carpet.
He wants the red carpet, babe. He wants the red carpet. So that corporate culture has to have that everybody matters type of piece to it. Then we look at base compensation. That's the third layer. Some people might think that's the most important layer. I do think it's the attention grabbing layer. You have to provide, especially key employees, but you really have to provide any employee that you want to stay with base compensation that's sufficient to alleviate their fear of financial instability. You don't want them wondering how are they going to make their grocery bill or make their mortgage payments. They will almost always perform better if they have a guaranteed comp program that's sufficient to meet their consumption needs. That when they count everything that they are spending in a given month, if they can address all of that. Steve was spending more than 120. So Steve was despite the fact that that's unbelievable compensation for base in a sales role, and that's how the owners perceived it. It wasn't enough. One of the things that we did with Steve was we layered that additional base compensation in there. And so he went from 120 to 240. And there was a look back in terms of if he ran dry for a long time, there was a way to capture it out of future commissions, but
Hmm.
his base comp was that. And do you guess how we found out what the number that we decided on?
You asked him?
Yeah, yeah. It was that it was that straightforward. Hey, how much guaranteed money do you need to make sure that you can make all your payments?
Yeah.
And again, he's pretty tax heavily person, so that wasn't surprising that it was higher for that from that
Mhm.
standpoint. There are a bunch of studies that demonstrate that compensation isn't really the overriding consideration for job satisfaction, as long as the base compensation is sufficient to meet the financial needs that they have from a security standpoint.
Yeah.
That that is that surprised me the first time I saw that the base comp wasn't that big of a deal as long as it took away that fear of financial instability. Does that surprise you, Doug?
I guess it does and it doesn't. In the corporate world, typically your compensation is enough that you can live on. But, when you look at some of the service industry areas, they're not making enough money to live on, this idea of living wage. So they want to make enough to be comfortable and that, but not have to worry about where the money comes from. But things like benefits and other things, I think, also play a huge role because that's another expense that if they're not given it, that they have to pay for out of their compensation. So, it's just a circular issue, I think, for people. And if it's like, hey, if you can take a couple of things off of my plate that I don't have to pay for, that you're going to provide me and still compensate me, then I think they look at that as a whole versus just what are you going to pay me?
Yeah. The next layer is job satisfaction and growth opportunity. So job satisfaction is that just liking the duties that you're doing, and
Mhm.
you don't know if your employees like what they're doing unless you ask them, do you really like doing this stuff? And you got to show them a path where they can actually grow in their job and not be limited artificially. And then you communicate that growth opportunity to them. This is where it gets pretty individualized
Yeah.
uh, because people are different, and you want to communicate with them in a way that's comfortable to them, not necessarily you. So the five love languages I mentioned before, one is gift giving. So sometimes people feel love when you give them gifts.
Hmm.
Others are words of affirmation. Uh, Still another method is quality time, where you spend time with them. Another one is physical touch. So that'd be the one where you shake their hand and use two hands to shake their hand, or maybe
Hmm.
pat them on the back type of thing, at the top of the shoulder when you're giving them praise, because that makes them, or if you were to give them a gift, it might be a gift for a you know a massage, or massage therapist or something like that.
Okay.
Um, the final one, and I saying it's final because it's also my wife's love language. It's acts of service. My wife feels loved when you do things for her.
Okay.
So do chores for her and all that stuff. And I always tell her, Doc, I always say, loving you is a hard job, my dear, because she knows that she's an acts of service person as well.
Hmm.
Um, so when you were confronted with that individual, and you're as a supervisor, you need to understand kind of where they're at in terms of how they feel recognition best. If I belong to a CEO group myself, and there's a guy, we've been members for years, and um, I shook his hand, and I went to put my hand on my left hand on his shoulder. He'd spent a bunch of time with me, and he'd helped me on a particular business thing that I was doing.
Hmm.
And he backed away. He's like, "What are you doing?" Like, "Well, I was just gonna pat your shoulder." He goes, "Yeah, we're good shaking hands. I'm happy to help." So for him, it actually made him uncomfortable that I was
Yeah.
trying to recognize him. So it was not doing the right thing. So that having them have job satisfaction means that you're communicating to them in a way that they receive the communication as being favorable. And then also letting them know there's a path here. It's not just, this is your job, you're never going to move from it, you're an engineer, you're never going to be a supervisor or a project manager, unless there are multiple levels of engineer within your company. But you want to show that they have some sort of growth opportunity. Now, I think change is overrated. But when's the last time somebody congratulated you? How long have you been married, Doug?
6 years.
So people don't come to you and say, hey, congratulations on being married for 6 years. They congratulate you when you have the change happen and you get married. When you take a job, they congratulate you for the job change. But nobody says, hey, great job, great deal on your 500th day of service to this company.
Mm-hmm.
They don't do that stuff until you're there for 20, 25 years type of thing. So the recognition, they're not getting it from other folks. And so if you got to give them that recognition, but on top of it, if you give them an opportunity for a promotion or a new title or something, even if it's a slight raise, doesn't have to be a huge raise, but even if it's a senior engineer rather than an engineer or a junior engineer, oh, congratulations on that, because they're going to get that from other people. They're going to go home to their spouse, and their spouse is going to say, good job. You got a promotion, you got a raise, and you got a new job position. That's really awesome. And so seeing that growth opportunity has a lot to do with them feeling good. So now we're going to talk about some of the money.
Mm-hmm.
The other stuff was pretty easy. It actually looked pretty easy up until then, didn't it? Lots of it with words and.
Yeah, I mean, but table stakes, for most companies, you got to have those things. So
Yeah. So the next layer is the variable comp. And we build it in two ways, or we suggest with key employees that you build it in two ways. This is kind of where the separation, where the cream kind of rises to the top.
mm-hmm.
We're really starting to narrow here, as you can see on this layer cake. We've really started to narrow the size and scope of that program. In the variable comp, we're looking at they're getting bonuses or commissions. Let's use Steve as an example. He was at 240 base. He actually willingly took a reduction in his variable compensation after we presented this whole program to him. It wasn't huge, but it was a slight reduction
Mm-hmm.
In order to fund this program, because you'll see in a little bit it comes from a different spot too, where he got additional comp. But the variable comp should be something that directly incents them to be pointed in the right direction, the same direction that the company wants them to be pointed in. So for Steve, it was really easy. It was, sell, 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 sell.
Mm-hmm.
But what we wanted to incent was sell at our margins, our preferred margins, not just sell anything. So we actually got him to agree that the commissions were applicable only when a certain margin level was hit.
Okay.
Have you ever done sales before, Doug?
I haven't, I mean, not myself directly in sales, but I've worked at enough companies and worked with enough salespeople and understand sales organizations to understand everything that you're talking about.
So let's say I sell master service agreements to companies for $3,500,
Mm-hmm.
and I talk to them about the benefits of working with Vertus and all that stuff, and my partner says we need more sales, we need more numbers coming in. I guarantee you, I can fill a line out the door by selling those things at 2,000.
Yes.
It's just, I mean, I cut the price. We're not going to make any money on it, but I could spike revenue like you would not believe. It's not healthy for the organization. We got to point it in the right direction. So pointing it in the right direction is what do we do to increase the sales to 3,500? Now, I'm not a commissioned and salesperson, but let's say I was, and let's say I got anything over 3,000, and that was my commission structure. Well, do you think I'll be selling them for 3,500 or 3,100?
3,500.
Yeah, I mean, when it's coming out of my pocket, hey, for sure I'm not gonna, why would I cut the price? That's the only part that I'm making. So we structured that. So variable comp that puts them in that same role as where the company is pointed. The employee achieves successful results only if their contributions are being felt by the company.
Mm-hmm.
It's more motivating to the key employees if the metrics are designed in a way that gives them insight into the amount of the variable comp so that they can actually calculate it and feel it, like they know when they walked out of that contract signing that this is the amount that they're going to get. That's when it works perfect. They know exactly what it was worth to them. Not if this happens and this happens. They know, I just sold that master services agreement project, and I'm using myself as an example here,
Mm-hmm.
and I made $500, and I know that's the number I made.
Yeah.
If I sell it for 3,400, then I walk out knowing I sold it and I made 400. It's really easy for me to calculate.
Yeah.
The frequency of payment has to be pretty immediate if you want this variable comp to really work well. If you do it annually, you may as well throw it out. Do it semi-annually, you may as well throw it out. It may as well be biannual if you're going to do it semi-annual. I mean, we're going to pay every 2 years. It's too far out. They don't feel it. Things can happen. Things change. So you might want to bring it to the quarter. I think it's got to be quarter at the minimum. One of the things I like to do is I like to have a comp program where the bonus pays out on the quarter. Based on quarterly performance, but it's not paid until the last day of the following quarter, such that they already qualify for their next bonus before, by the time they, in one day they will have qualified for their next bonus by the time they're getting paid for Q1. So in Q1, you would get paid, Q1 ends on March 31st, you would get paid June 30th for your Q1 bonus.
Okay.
So on June 30th, you already know, well, geez, I already qualified for my next bonus. What that does is fight off this ledge or cliff, what happens when people sit around and wait for their bonuses and then they quit. Have you noticed people do that?
Yeah, but especially sometimes salespeople, if they make a big sale, they wait for the commission to come in, and once they get it, they're gone.
Right. And if it's when people say, tell me when they first become my clients and they say, yeah, we've got an annual bonus program for our sales folks or whomever our leaders. I just say, well, geez, on January 30th, the day you pay this out, do you just hold your breath and just hope nobody quits? and not surprisingly, they say, yeah, I do. Of course you do. You've structured it so that every important person on your team, if they're going to leave on a particular day.
Yeah.
We already picked the date. February 1 is the day. So we suggest more, if you can get it down to monthly, that's great. Even if it's a month look back, that's great too. The more immediate it is, the more likely that compensation will really motivate them to do the right things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now we're building the next layer. Now we're getting to the 2, 3, 4 people that in the company that really matter. This is where I really got Steve in my story, where I really got him to turn, and it wasn't anything to do with ownership. It was getting his team to like him. So do you remember why Steve was disliked by his other sales folks, Doug?
Because he was arrogant and he was doing more sales than anyone else, and he wasn't teaching anyone, what his secrets to success were.
That's exactly it. So what we did was we said, hey, if you teach these people these things, we will give you an override on their sales. because he's really good at what he's doing. And so we got him to cut his variable comp just a little bit. And then we said, but if you make these other people successful, you're going to make so much more.
Yeah.
So because actually he had the highest commission percentage in the company. So we actually made more money if somebody else sold it than Steve.
Yeah.
So we were willing to do this to try to get Steve to impart some of these tools. So what happened in the past was if somebody came in with a $100,000 project and they asked for Steve would ignore it because it wasn't big enough he was working on these big $1 million deals. It wasn't big enough to capture his interest.
Yeah.
But he didn't like the sales guys, so he wasn't going to give it to them, and he didn't get anything for it. There were no splits or anything. So what ended up happening is Steve started making friends within the organization, within the sales group, even though he wasn't the leader of the sales group.
Mm-hmm.
But he helped those folks. So it doesn't have to be just the sales manager, because he's not a sales manager, and I think it would have been a huge mistake to make him a sales manager.
Yeah.
Really bad. But really bad because why would you take Babe Ruth out of the lineup and say you're going to be our hitting coach now?
Yeah.
No, we want you in the lineup. I should come up with a more. Okay, I'm not 105 years old here. I'm in my 50s, but maybe we'll use Mike Trout instead of Babe Ruth in my example. So,
Babe Ruth works.
yeah,
Everybody knows who he is.
But everybody knows Babe. So the override made it so that people now wanted to, they were fine with partnering them. Hey, I met with so and so, and they want you on this deal. So with your 5% override, let's work on it together. And now he was suddenly willing to work on it together because now there was compensation in it for him. And he was a money guy. That was his love language, if he had one.
Yeah.
And so that was a big piece for him. That group compensation. It's not always advantageous to reward them for the success of their group, but if they have control over it, or control over their results, or can influence their results, then it's certainly something that you should take a look at. You want them sharing their information with the group. You want them helping others to be successful. It discourages that unhealthy competition, and it encourages a cooperative effort between the key employee and those that are in their shadows. No longer, when Steve was in the office, he was like running a motorboat at high speed, and the wake that was behind him was huge, and he was knocking people over with the wake, and he didn't even know he was doing it. And the owners of the company were trying to calm the waters that are being created without teeing them off because they wanted the sales to come in. And so now the whole thing of paying him for teaching and helping, it got him to notice that he had a large weight behind him. And it got him to start thinking, well, maybe I could just slow it down just a little bit. It'll be almost as fun, and I don't disturb others, and maybe I even help them. So that was a big piece. That was when we really got him to turn.
Okay.
Where this would work. The final is, I told you Steve wanted to be an owner of the company. So I said, okay, Steve, here's the deal. It's $1.4 million that you got to pay. And, they'll loan you the money. The company will loan you to do it. And at the end of the day, you're going to be repaying these loaned monies from your commissions. And now you're also going to be getting distribution. So maybe in a good years it'll wash out. Maybe it won't. But, this is going to be your responsibility to repay it. And he actually was okay with that. He didn't have the money, but he was willing to pay it back.
Yeah.
So instead of that, I said, instead of that, why don't we do this? With the current tax rates the way they are, once you make more than $250,000, you get a surcharge for the ACA or Obamacare or whatever you want to call it for the health piece.
Mm-hmm.
And that surcharge makes it so that the difference between capital gains income and ordinary income is not that great. And he has blown through all of the payroll withholding caps. So, he's paying 1.6% ish on the Medicaid portion of the payroll taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So, the income that whether he sells his ownership interest later or whether he gets paid out as a bonus is the difference of about 8%, 8 or
Okay.
9%. And so I said, well, do you want to do that where you got to come up with this money and pay it out and owe the company money, or how about we just treat you like you are an owner, and we'll pay you as though you're a 10% owner. You're gonna get it'll be as a bonus,
Mm-hmm.
but you'll get paid that way. When we sell, we'll pay you in the event that you end up. In the event that we sell for a profit we established a base value. So we gave him a share of the appreciation of the company. I'll arbitrarily say it's over 20 million, but we didn't give it to him from zero.
Yeah.
We call this synthetic equity or equity participation plan. It's a non-qualified plan, so you can discriminate between employees, not discriminate based on race or that kind of stuff, but discriminate. You don't have to offer it to everybody like you do health insurance.
Yeah.
And they get to participate in the growth of the value of the organization. It's synthetic. We call it synthetic. It's contractual, really. It's not legal ownership, but it's contractual. The employee gets a bundle of rights. So, for instance, let's say the baseline value is 20 million and you allow them to participate in 10% over the baseline. You can give them, call it units if you want. You can call it percentage. You can tie it to the value of the stock if you want to.
Okay.
But it is really, really flexible. It doesn't have to be anything. It is one of the most flexible tools that I've seen. There's a couple of things to comply with the Internal Revenue Service. There has to be a substantial risk of forfeiture.
Mm-hmm.
And that means the IRS is going to say, Steve, you got income unless you have a risk of forfeiture. So we typically have the forfeiture occur when the employee either voluntarily or involuntarily terminates, unless the voluntary termination is in accordance with the retirement trigger, because we can develop it as a retirement payout too.
Okay.
So it really treats them like they're owners. We can even put them on the board of directors. If they say, well, I want to voice in the controls, like, okay, we'll sit, you can be on the board of directors. We'll even contractually agree that we will vote you on to the board of directors, which is what we did with Steve. So, but if Steve leaves, if he ever goes, he doesn't get anything.
Okay.
And that's the benefit to the owners.
So that's different than stock options, where once you're vested, you have the option to purchase those shares.
So here's why I don't like stock options. The reason why I don't like stock options is because now the person that's so important, Steve in my example, is so important that you're willing to give him, they were willing to do an outright grant of ownership. So let's say they do stock options. He's going to exercise those stock options when he leaves. That's when most people exercise them, right?
Yeah.
You can exercise them before and you don't get ordinary income tax treatment like you do. And so stock options exercised on the way out the door is the same as synthetic equity or phantom stock or equity participation. It's at the same tax rate. In order for you to benefit from the differential in the taxes, you actually have to exercise the option and hold on to it for a period of time before you get that capital gains treatment going forward.
Yeah.
So if this really important employee, so important that you gave him an outright grant to stock, is now leaving. and they've exercised their interest. Now they're 5% owner, and you're not only losing this key employee that was so important that you actually gave them an outright grant or stock options, so important that you gave it to them. Now you've got to replace that person, and you got to pay for the fair market value of the ownership interest that's being left by him or her. So it's a double whammy. You know, it's not only are you losing this great employee that was so great that you offered this to him or her, now you got to pay him or her the fair market value of the interest that they're leaving, unless you want to keep them as an employee. So the synthetic equity is really great from the employer standpoint, because if they walk out, well, we don't pay you if you leave. That was the one proviso. We'll pay you if you die. We'll pay you if you retire. We'll pay you if we sell. We'll pay you if we merge. We'll pay you comp and profit. We'll pay you as an owner in profitable years and distribution. We'll pay you. We'll pay you if you're disabled. But and we'll even pay you if we fire you. We sometimes do.
Yeah.
But if you leave when we don't want you to, we're not paying you.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's better, stock options if they're vested and, they can exercise the options and.
Yeah. So up on the screen now, okay, so I'm going to go back. That's the layered cake. It's 7 layers. And I think each layer is important for that key employee, but the bottom layers are important for all employees. And if you really have some folks you want to engage, just keep adding on those layers. Maybe as you add on that layer, you'll really start to see whether they're key when you get to the variable comp. If they excel in that environment, then they'll probably excel if they positively influence their group and collaborate in a great way, and they'll probably be a good equity participant in a phantom or otherwise scenario. The last slide, these are just some of the things that we do. We work for MSPs, but we could talk about that later too. Were there any questions that came in?
None that have come in yet, but if you're online and you have a question, feel free to hit it in the Q&A. I guess one question I have, and it kind of goes back to that, I forget which layer it was, but the opportunity for growth, right? The growth opportunity.
Yes.
The 4th layer, because I know, I troll around the MSP communities and groups and things like that, and it's one of the things I see quite a bit, especially for small MSPs that maybe hire an employee. Sometimes those employees, they don't understand what the growth opportunity is. Are they going to be just a tech for the rest of their lives, or if they come in on the help desk, is that it, right? Do they
right. And so their supervisor really has to communicate that to them in a way that they understand. So you're at the help desk. This is the career pattern that we see in our company when somebody's at the help desk. Now, this is a big issue for the folks that are younger than me. I said I'm in my mid-50s. I hate to knock millennials, and you always hear people, but there's a lot of job movement with folks that are under 40 compared to when I was under 40. And I think part of that movement is because we're not communicating well enough as employers as to what the growth opportunity is for them. And so if you're not going to communicate it to them, and they're out there saying, well, I got other people offering me roles, and I see where I see the change right away. I mean, I don't have to wait.
Yeah.
Now they may the next employer may also do a bad job explaining where the growth is for them going forward. But if you really want to get people engaged and motivated, tell them what their next 3 jobs are going to be.
Yeah.
And say, hey, this is what we see for you. Is this something that you're good with? Because we're going to start training you in this way, and that type of thing. Now, in the world of social media, the other piece that happens, and you're probably really familiar with this, is very rarely when I have a bad day and I make some stupid decision, or I trip down a flight of stairs or something, I'm not putting those failures out on my social media.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, yeah, got a speeding ticket today. you um, I, I'm not going to boast about that kind of stuff, but people are sharing their real life stories.
Hmm.
And when you have 500 friends and you're seeing good stories, and it's 1% a day that are posting good stories, you might be looking at yourself saying, why is everything good happening to other people?
Yeah.
And you might yearn for that more than I did when I was under 40 and there wasn't as much communication about it. So I think that communication is a big deal. And to break it down so that senior help desk um, technician, add to the titles if you can. Even maybe change your review process to follow with it. So maybe it's not an annual review, maybe it's every 6 months they're getting a review.
Yeah. Okay. That makes
That's
that
what
makes
Yeah,
that makes
that's what I
sense.
see as a lawyer looking in when I get clients scratching their heads saying, I don't know why we can't keep anybody. It's like we spent 6 months training them. They work for us for a year. We get to break even on their variable costs where their contributions are always mattering, and then somebody else picks them off for us. Like, well, let's go
Yeah.
through this stuff. Is your base comp high enough? Do they have variable comp? Do you tell them what their growth opportunity is? Are you incenting them with how others perform in their roles? And you got to look at all those things.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too, at this point in time, is you have to look at, there's a lot of opportunity out there because unemployment is so low. And, if you're skilled in a particular area, there's most likely people looking for you. So, it's kind of, you have to step up your game as an employer to make sure that your employees are happy and, take care of the 7 layers to, uh,
Right.
to keep them from leaving. But I think, that's where, culture comes into
Yeah.
play a lot, right? Because if I don't enjoy going into work, I'm not saying I have to love every day, wake up, yay, I'm going to work. But you don't want to wake up and say, oh crap, I got to go to work, and I
Right.
hate this and I hate that, these people, and nobody listens to me. That you're just asking them to leave at that point.
Yeah. Doug, do you think I missed any layers? I mean, I could probably use the same deal and just move everything where the fruit is on the top. I could probably make an 8 layer. Do you see where there's anything missing, or does anybody see anything missing out there on the layers?
It looks pretty complete to me, and I think, again, if we go back to MSPs, a lot of them are business owners that may not have spent a lot of time in the corporate world, and don't necessarily sometimes understand all of these different layers because they've never experienced it themselves.
Yeah.
And again, I see a lot of people asking about, well, how do I compensate my salespeople? Or, I need to hire somebody. What do I need to do? And, so I think these are themes that are kind of common across, at least a certain subset of managed service providers. So, I think from an information standpoint, to me, it's kind of, yeah, this is obvious because I've been around the block a few times, so to speak. But
Right.
for others that don't have that experience, it's really great information.
Very cool. Well, a shameless pitch about what Virtus Law does is we essentially do what MSPs do, only in the legal side.
Hmm.
And so, if somebody came to me and said we have a retention issue, or we want to we want to make sure that people want to stay, that this is a program that we would tailor for them and figure it out. Most of our engagements involve MSAs and income tax planning, and registering their trademarks and their federally. By the way, if you haven't registered your company name with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, anybody can take that name and use it in a different jurisdiction, and that's bad stuff, and we take care of that stuff and work on the employment stuff, non-competes and non-solicitations, and all of that type of thing. But this is just one of those projects that we've done a lot of, and I really enjoy developing the programs to make it fun for the employees.
Yeah, and I know one of the questions I asked when I first met you was, are you limited to any particular states, or do you work, at least nationwide?
Yeah, it depends on the state on how we approach it, but sometimes we hire an attorney in that state.
Hmm.
Sometimes the engagement is a more of a federal engagement. We're licensed in federal courts. So we do have multiple jurisdictions covered by our existing attorneys. So,
Okay.
you know, but yeah, normally if it's an issue, we find a way to serve the client and overcome that issue. Sometimes it's actually by hiring somebody
Yeah.
in that jurisdiction.
Yeah, and I know, when you think of, legal services, right? I mean, you can, you know, do a Google search and find, 1,000 lawyers in your immediate area, but do they know what MSPs need?
Right.
Do they understand? Do they even understand what it is that you do?
That's, do they understand all the federal acts that get triggered because we use telephone lines and DSL lines and those types of things? That's all interstate commerce
Hmm.
that gets triggered. So anything federal is an MSP is stuck with having to comply with, and they don't, the average business lawyer is not going to know all the stuff that applies to them. The cybersecurity issues are so huge right now,
Yeah.
especially at the federal level. It's scary. Limiting the liability associated with that kind of stuff and protecting assets for the MSP so that it can survive a ransomware attack on their that accomplished through their vehicle or their service. It's yeah, the issues are really unique with MSPs. Not to mention the fact that any contract where you have an all-you-can-eat type of flat fee utility model has its own dangers that you got to protect against and
Hmm.
scope things like that, which is really unique with MSPs. Although our economy is moving more to a subscription-based economy, so we
Yes.
probably will, more lawyers being able to serve in that arena. I happen to fall into the good fortune of having a brother that has had a company that's an MSP that he started in the late 90s,
Okay.
and I and I happen to be working for a bunch of technology companies doing uh, ERP and CRM consulting implementation. So I just happen to know the lingo and understand it. And I had one client that was doing a lot of refinery software. And so we had a lot of work in that area. So they was just kind of stumbled into it. It was good luck.
Cool. Well, hey, it sounds like it's been successful for you. And like I said, for MSPs, to find legal advice, that know what they do, it's good to know you're out there.
Super. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Tom, and hopefully we'll get to meet in person one of these days.
That sounds good. I'll,
All
I'll
right.
let you determine whether that's good after we talk.
All right. All right. And thank you everyone for joining in, and we'll be back within a week or two with another webinar. Have a great day, Tom.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Bye.